The Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Well, welcome to the SpotTrack.com podcast. I'm Kevin Sylvester, along with Paul Peck. We're from BuffaloSportsPage.com, along with the founder from SpotTrack.com, Mike Giannetti, and we're going to talk some fantasy football today, and we have a special guest here. Mike, why don't you introduce our guest?
We do, yeah. We're going to kind of kick off our fantasy week here with our guest from FantasyPros.com. This is Mike Tagliere. He's going to join us, one of the gurus over there. I know he does a lot of podcasts himself over there, and he's a big contributor. So happy to have him on, and we're gonna kind of pick his brain as we kind of dive into fantasy season here.
My first question for Mike, as we welcome him in, it's FantasyPros.com. That's kind of an oxymoron of names, right? Fantasy and pro.
With how unpredictable it could become, yeah, I guess there would be someone.
Yes, but of course everybody that plays wants to be a pro in their own mind and in their own league, so it actually makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
It kind of does. And that's the thing. If you're right more than 60% of the time, you're most likely to end up winning more than not.
Yeah, well, being right 60% of the time, I try to convince my wife I'm right 60% of the time. That doesn't work either. But
forget it.
Mike, why don't you tell everybody first what FantasyPros.com is and what you folks do there?
Yeah, Fantasy Pros it started as a site with tools on it, right? You can go there and find all of your favorite analysts, all their rankings show up in one place, and what it does is it puts them together to form a consensus. So it's like you have a room of 120 different analysts that are putting their rankings on there, and it tells you the average of it. So what it does is give you an idea as to where the industry is on every player. And then from there, they built up some mock drafts where you're able to go in and complete mock drafts in 5 minutes, and you're drafting against expert, ADP, whatever you want to choose to do. And just recently we started upping the content, and that's kind of what I'm in charge of there. So I do write a primer piece every single week in season that touches on every player from every single game. It's like a 25,000-word monster that I write every single week.
25,000 words? Wow.
Yeah, I in season I write about 40 to 45,000 words a week. And someone asked me the other day, they're like, how big is a novel? And the average novel is 60 to 80,000 words. So they said, essentially, you're writing a novel every other week. And I said, yeah, through the season, pretty much.
So every guy that catches a pass, runs the ball, or throws a pass on a given NFL weekend, you are actually analyzing and writing about. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Every player that's viable for fantasy football purposes. So if there's I'm usually touching on at least the top 4 wide receivers, at least the 2 running backs, the tight ends, everybody that you would potentially think about starting in fantasy football, I touch on every single player.
God love you, Mike. That is pretty awesome. All right, so this is the week now where everybody is gearing up. Their drafts are either coming this week or next week to get ready for the start of the season on September 9th. So we want to go through a couple of different categories that in your mind, and let's start with the basic stuff. Who are, let's say, we'll pin you down here to your top 5 fantasy players going into this year's drafts.
The top 5 players, that's pretty simple. It's some combination of Todd Gurley is my number 1 player. Well, it's really hard for some players to repeat as the number 1 fantasy running back. We're talking about the most likely of scenarios. And he gets the edge over Le'Veon Bell just because Le'Veon not being with the team through training camp preseason, it could affect his workload early in the season, kind of like it did last year. Le'Veon Bell still stays pick at number 2. Then you get to number 3, and that's where there's a tier of 3 running backs. And me personally, I love Saquon Barkley. I feel like Pat Shurmur coming over to the Giants offense means a whole lot. I think people are underestimating the impact that Pat Shurmur will have on that team. Now, they went out and got Nate Solder in free agency. Tom Brady's old left tackle. They drafted Will Hernandez early in the draft. And, Pat Shurmur coming there will change the entire outlook of that offense. So don't be shocked if you see the Giants finish top 12 scoring, which obviously is great for someone like Saquon Barkley, who's going to be used on all 3 downs. And then the next 2, you have Ezekiel Elliott, David Johnson. My concern with those guys is that they're going to play on offenses that aren't very good. Ezekiel Elliott with the Cowboys, with Des Bryant gone, Jason Witt gone, there's some credit up for grabs. So can he step into that receiving role? We haven't really seen too much of that from him. But David Johnson, the man's a monster. I mean, if he was on any other team, I would want to rank him a little bit higher. But he does play behind one of the worst offensive lines in football in Arizona. And the offense, under a new Steve Wilkes, a defensive-minded head coach, I just don't know how exciting this offense is going to be. And that's why I've tempered expectations on David Johnson.
Here's a general more question, because you mentioned running backs there. So I go into my fantasy draft. Should I be targeting a running back as my first pick, a quarterback, or are we talking about depending upon what your draft position is and which player you're going to get? Because there's been waves, right, where receivers are more valuable than running backs, and it seems like we're having this resurgence in running backs now as opposed to quarterbacks. What's your general advice for those of us going into our fantasy drafts this weekend or next week?
Well, a lot of it comes down to scoring settings as well, because some people still play in standard leagues where there's not a point per reception. And if you're playing in a standard league, running backs means so much more than wide receivers do. I've actually done articles on basically what positions get bumps in certain scoring formats. But running backs in standard are extremely important. And even in PPR, it's rare to find a running back in the third or fourth round who is guaranteed 300-plus touches. Meanwhile, wide receivers, you can find some guys that are going to get 130 targets down there in the third or fourth round. So you can, it's almost like the top tiers of running backs, those are the guys that are not in timeshares. They're the guys that are not going to split carries with someone else. So what if you get down to the area of guys like, Donald Jones and Peyton Barber? Nobody knows who the starter is going to be there. When you get down to the Patriots, Sonny Michel and Rex Burkhead, you don't know who's going to get the carries there. So by getting one of these top-tier running backs, it's allowing you to get guaranteed production as long as that player is on the field. Wide receiver, there's a much wider net. Now, once you get outside those top five, Antonio Brown is like a sure thing. Like, you just know if you draft him, if he's on the field, he's going to produce. But behind him, Odell Beckham, now competing with targets with a lot of other players in New York. You have Julio Jones, who's been a little up and down through his career. I love Julio. He's still a first-round pick, but it really all comes down to, your scoring settings. If you're in a PPR league, you should have probably 3 or 4 wide receivers go in the first round. In standard, I would argue that it should be a whole lot of running backs in Antonio Brown.
I can tell you what, I'm glad you mentioned the Patriot thing. I will never draft another Patriot running back as long as I live again. They just, you can't win with them.
Well, the thing is, here's the thing. So the Patriots, if you go back and look over the last 4 or 5 years, you look at the running backs, and I think there's a reason that they haven't really gone with one guy. LeGarrette Blount is a 1-2 down back. Even going back to Shane Vereen, he was a third down back. You had Stephen Ridley, you had issues fumbling the ball. You keep going through this list. James White's a receiver. Rex Burkhead's a utility player. And they never, ever spent money in free agency on a running back. They never spent high equity in the draft. So when they bring in someone like Sonny Michel, who is a true 3-down running back, not only he had to have his knee drained, which is never a good thing, but at the same time, they kind of know what's wrong. They went in there and they fixed it. But the fact that they spent a first-round pick on him, it kind of tells me that they felt a need to up their running game and stop playing so much piecework. But at the same time, there is some risk involved in it, and that's why I think Sonny Michel is falling in drafts in that 6th, 7th round area.
Mike, I want to stick on the free agent topic here because a big audience for Spot Track are the Dynasty League players. Obviously, they're on the site. They're following the actual contract structures because that's important to, salary cap leagues and things like that. A little bit more of the advanced fantasy user, right? I wonder if you've done any work, any research, or if you've seen anything that you can speak to where guys who are entering expiring contracts, right? Guys who are entering their contract year, like a Le'Veon Bell. Is there an uptick in fantasy? Is there a more cautious approach? Are they worried about getting injured? Are they going out there and being monsters because they know the next big deal is coming? From a fantasy perspective, where does that sort of stand?
Yeah, it's a narrative that doesn't technically exist. And there's been a few people who have kind of debunked the theory that players do better in contract seasons. Everyone's motivated by different things, right? Some people are money motivated. Some people know they need to remain healthy, so they're obviously not going to go all out because they're worried about getting injured, and then they're obviously not going to get that big contract. So it really all depends, and it's kind of like I was actually talking about Joe Flacco earlier on a podcast, saying that Joe Flacco has looked relatively bad the last couple of years, but the fact that they brought in Lamar Jackson, it's what lit a fire under him. Some people take that to heart. Some people are like, whatever, and it's not going to take my job. But Joe Flacco is taking it to shirt. He looks like a different quarterback going into the season. So it's really an individual basis. But in the end, the only reason in dynasty leagues what you have to look at with that is not so much valuing the player and what you think that contract is going to do to him. It's more about what do you think about that player's talent? What's his situation right now? Because Sammy Watkins, while he was with the Rams, his value, they knew his contract was coming to an end. But if you love the player Sammy Watkins, you know his situation cannot get any worse because he saw 70 targets last year. 70 targets. There's not many players who can do what he did on 70 targets. So to know that he's going to be signed in free agency and go elsewhere, his situation can only improve. Meanwhile, someone like Deion Lewis last year, who we knew was going into the contract year, his situation is likely to regress because he's going to be part of a lower scoring offense. So it's all about the situation that they're in at that time and how you project them as a talent, where everything can go from there.
So can we also debunk the theory that players that recently signed contracts also take a step back? Maybe lay down a little bit, like a Todd Gurley, right, who just kind of cashed in?
Yeah, no, I yes, 100%. Because the thing is, NFL contracts aren't guaranteed, right? Kirk Cousins is, but most of the contracts are really not guaranteed. A lot of people talk about Jerick McKinnon and the contract he got. The 49ers can cut him after one season and kind of be done with him and not take too big of a contract hit. You guys know that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a year-to-year game, and these players know that. So I don't take that stuff into consideration too much when projecting players for the first year.
We're talking with Mike Tagliere from Fantasy Pros. Mike, you gave us your top 5 guys a couple minutes ago. How about a couple of sleepers? How about a couple of guys to stay away from?
Yeah, one of the big sleepers I've been talking about this year is it's rare to find a player who's going to be a starting wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers go undrafted. But Geronimo Allison is one of my favorite sleepers this year just because he's going to start opposite Devontae Adams. They're going to have Randall Cobb in the spot. The fact that Randall Cobb had off-season ankle surgery, that's not a good thing. Like, players, pass catchers, I should say, have trouble coming back from those foot injuries. So Geronimo Allison, Aaron Rodgers has singled him out in interviews, saying that basically these young kids, they need to start watching him and how he practices because he's doing it right. We saw James Jones catch 14 touchdowns from Aaron Rodgers, a handful of years ago. Another couple players, Anthony Miller from Chicago. He's a kid who's getting rich everywhere he goes. If for whatever reason Allen Robinson starts out slow, if he's got to get his feet under him, learning the new offense, Anthony Miller could make a difference. And if you look at Mitch Trubisky's track record with slot receivers, it's been really good. Like Brian Switzer with North Carolina, so Kendall Wright became a fantasy option towards the end of 2017. Anthony Miller is extremely talented, and the game has proven the game's not too big for him. A couple other names, James White is worth a late run flyer. Mike Williams from the Chargers, love him. But as for players I would avoid, there's so many people talking about Isaiah Crowell right now. I'm not a fan. Going from a Browns team that had one of the best interior offensive lines in football to the Jets, who honestly I could see them replacing all 5 starting positions on that offensive line. It's not going to be pretty. Their team is not expected to win very many games. And if that's the case, you need to be a pass catcher. I would say that Bilal Powell is a better pass catcher there. Isaiah Crowell is going to be boring production. He's not going to win your fantasy league. Another one that's extremely overdrafted based on last year was Deshaun Watson. I understand why people want to draft him. I understand the upside that you get when you draft Deshaun Watson, but sometimes people are taking him ahead of Aaron Rodgers. And guys, we're talking about a 5-game sample size against some pretty bad defenses in that span. I mean, Blake Bortles from week 12 to week 16 was the number 1 fantasy quarterback. So I don't think we should take too much from a 5-game sample size. Obviously, it was nice, but don't pay for last year's production.
Interesting. Good advice there. On SpotTrack.com, a lot of fantasy players use the contract tools to have a salary cap league. And what advice would you give players that have salary cap to work with in a salary cap fantasy league?
Salary caps are interesting. It's something that's kind of taken over lately, and I've recently gotten involved in a few more of them. But it's honestly locking up those guys that are young on really cheap salaries. When we have draft picks that only cost you a certain amount, those draft picks are worth a lot of equity, especially if you're a team that has a solid group of wide receivers and you're going to look to take running back in the future. Because it's so simple to grab a running back in dynasty rookie drafts. Like, who's going to get what role based on where they were drafted. There's going to be sleepers every year. But when a team spends the top, taking the first couple rounds on a running back, they're going to give him every opportunity to succeed. So I would say, target draft picks. Like, instead of targeting the boring teams like Isaiah Crowell that are never going to turn into a star, I would much rather move on from those boring players and grab a draft pick. Because in most salary cap leagues, most caps, those draft picks are extremely, extremely affordable, and you get to keep them for 3 or 4 years based on your league.
That's great advice for those listening who are in the contest on SpotTrack.com,
right.
Mike. We just gave an inside tip there.
That's all right. That's all right. We're looking for winners. Mike, last question. We'll wrap it up here on this. Obviously things have evolved a lot in terms of sports and fantasy over the past really decade. More specifically with the daily fantasy, and I know you guys do dabble into that. You've got a premium section for that on Fantasy Pros, and we do a little bit of that on SpotTrack as well with some contests. But it's all the rage. It's where a lot of the players are going. Has it forced the league to sort of take a hit? Right? Are fantasy leagues a little less popular these days, or are they as popular because there's now one every day as well?
They're as popular, and honestly, like daily, I'm surprised it didn't get even bigger than it did, and it might continue to do that. With some of these, some people were always hesitant because of the gambling laws, and they were worried that this would roll into that. It was just like a weird thing with all of the legislation that was going to get involved. But now that we're starting to hear, gambling being accepted, that you're able to bet on games legally in certain states, I think you're going to see it grow only more. And for the NFL, to try and hold back this process, I think it's the worst thing possible because fantasy football was the best thing to happen for the NFL. Like people who would usually watch their home team, they're trying to watch the Bengals on Monday Night Football because they have AJ Green in their fantasy lineup. So it is only going to help the game grow like more than it ever has. And knowing that the betting laws are changing, it's going to continue to increase. So the NFL is on top of the world. They need to get the rules in place. But there's so many things going on when it comes to wearing a helmet. Some of these penalties that are being called, we don't want them to ruin the game because they can do that if they continue to push the game towards that. There's a reason everybody loves football, and we want to keep the game as it is.
Yeah, I agree. Some of these calls in the preseason, you're like, whoa, come on. You got to let them play a little bit here.
Just keep in mind, it's always more in the preseason because the officials are going to err on the side of throwing it on anything, and then once the regular season starts, it'll go right kind of back to normal.
Well, I want to go to Mike's point about the league kind of trying to hold things back and the gambling and stuff. That's just because they're trying to get everything set up for themselves, right?
Yeah, they're gonna have to.
Yeah.
The league, you're going to go to a stadium and you're going to be able to place your bets right there.
Yep. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get it to any commercial, any advertising you're doing. They want something mentioned done. Like any time a commercial mentions an NFL team, they want to get a piece of that. And I mean, you guys are getting a piece. You can't just by the viewership that you're going to get based on it. So it's somewhat unfair.
Mike, one more real quick. Do you dabble in the other sports in terms of fantasy on Fantasy Pros?
Honestly, no. It was easy when I was going to travel down to NFL how much of a year-round sport that it is. We decided to focus, I did all my focus on the draft. I did a bunch of profiles leading up to that, with mock drafts, breeding over teams drafts, and everything like that. So football is a year-round sport now, so they've dedicated these strictly to football.
All right. Well, it's great stuff that they do. FantasyPros.com. Mike Tagliere. Mike, thanks so much for your time, your expertise, and I'm sure we'll hit you up at some other point during the season for some more info from FantasyPros.com.
Absolutely, guys. I look forward to it.
All right, great stuff from Mike Tagliere there. I've gone through a period of where I hate fantasy football, I like fantasy football, and I've actually declined a couple of leagues this year because I'm with you. Kind of back into hating.
I have been playing fantasy football since 1985 when a buddy of mine transferred into college and said, hey, there's guys down at my college that are doing this. Why don't we do it? And I've played it for a long time and I've loved it. But lately, I'm with you. I'm like, it's almost gotten that everybody does it now. And there's so much, there's no skill anymore to it. There's no doing your own research. You just dial up a draft list, and you draft off your draft list. And I don't know. I'm with you, Kevin. Part of me says,
in other words, he's not winning.
That's
everybody
I've
else
won
got
a
too
few
good
times, but yes, that's
Listen,
part of it.
Fact be told, last year in our Buffalo Sports Page fantasy league with some of our premium members, Paul and I might have finished the last two spots.
Yeah. Was that on purpose?
No,
did you mail it in for sponsorship?
It wasn't corporate golf. No, it was not corporate golf. Basically because like the transaction wire, right?
You
Like,
have to live it.
You got to live on
and you
there.
got to be first.
You
And
gotta
I've
set
always
your alarm
been a guy who likes to take quarterbacks early because I want to know that I got a guy who's going to throw 25 or 30 touchdown passes for me. And that it clearly, when Mike goes through his top 5 and they're all running backs, that tells me I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
No, and well, the other thing was the draft was all online. Right. So to me, the best part of the fantasy, being in the fantasy league, was getting together for the draft.
Yes.
So I still try to do this, and it's been less and less every year.
Right.
You know?
'Cause we
I
have
make a ton of
wives.
food, and it's just me and my wife eating food. That's the
I'll tell
sad-
you
We're
what,
coming
that's
over
the
this
saddest
year.
story of
We're
Tuesday
coming
right
over
there.
this year.
No, I'll tell you what. I'll come over for your draft.
That's
I'll
right.
eat the food and drink the beer.
I'll let you hold the board.
Yes, I'll be happy. I'll announce the selections.
Thank you.
That'll be fine.
The stories,
Host-
the best stories that I have in my life from fantasy drafts are just of making fun of people and of having guys who weren't real big football guys. And this is sort of sad, but remember Joe Delaney, the running back for the Chiefs, who died in a tragic drowning incident? Somebody in one of my
drafted
leagues
him?
drafted him,
Oh, man.
and
and you didn't stop him, did you?
no, I don't think we did. but those those were sort of what made those gatherings fun.
We sort of always goat the person with the last pick into picking an inactive player every year.
Love it.
Just to sort of see where it
Love
goes, like
it.
a Manziel or a Favre or whatever
Right.
it's going to be. We sort of go that route.
And the last thing on the fantasy, it's Mike brings up great points, is that so much of it is based on last year, yet we all have learned the lesson that things change dramatically in the NFL from year to year. There's always 2 or 3 last place teams that make the playoffs year to year. So my best advice to anybody is don't just assume what is going to happen last year is going to happen again.
Let me. We want to talk some NHL here in a second because we're getting close to training camps and such. But you guys do daily fantasy?
I have. It's not consistent for me, but yeah, especially with a baseball season, a long season, I'll dive in every now and then. Yeah.
I have, and it's so like I don't know, man. But I guess they've had an issue in the past, right, with insiders, and then you have guys backing.
Yeah, who got guys who
30,000
play
teams, right?
1,000 teams a night.
These
because
computer-
they'll win. Their percentages will win certain.
These computer algorithms, right?
So I'll give you some background. I was out at the Sloan conference, the sports conference.
I thought you meant Sloan, New York.
the
I lived there
analytics
for a brief
concert.
period of time.
No, I don't think they'd be involved.
No, no, I don't think computers have gotten to Sloan. No, I'm kidding. Kidding. My in-laws are from
up in Boston. It was the analytic conference. It was a few years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago, when these things were really starting to hammer home. And the founders of these sites, FanDuel and DraftKings, were there. And not only were they there, they were presenting, and they were presenting how to win. They want you to know the algorithm. They want you to know the tricks to winning. Because in order to do so, you just said it. You've got to have 100 teams.
You play
going.
more, right?
You play a ton, and that's beneficial for everybody, right?
Sure.
So, and they want these guys to win. They want big winners. It's like Vegas. They want you to sit down, one or two guys to sit down and cash in, and they'll treat those guys well. It's the same philosophy.
Yeah, well,
but
they want
they're
somebody to
handing
win
out.
100,000. They just what you might not know is that he laid 400,000 on the table when he started.
And that's
right?
the way to do it, right?
Yeah.
But they were literally handing out the keys to the car, and if you sat there and listened and took some notes, you really could do well on it. I didn't do so. I kind of glossed over on it.
Sure, right.
But you talk about leagues getting more difficult because people are more privy. These daily fantasies are no joke. You've got to do for baseball. You've got to do matchups on hitter versus pitcher.
Yeah. Absolutely. You got to know that this guy
is the wind
is
blowing
a 260 hitter, but he hits 320 against that pitcher. You're playing him that night.
No question. So to do it every day daily is a job. And I kudos to the people that do it and actually make a living off it, because I know those people are out there probably in the dozens at this point. But I enjoy it I've got nothing to do on a Wednesday. There's 11 baseball games, whatever it is, and I'm interested. But I could see people kind of grinding on that a lot, and I don't know that legalized gambling will help that.
Hey, listen, I bought a scratch-off ticket at the grocery store today.
Yeah, that was pretty easy for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I lost.
Yeah.
So, but I look at it as the same.
No analytics involved in that.
That's what I mean.
Well, no, actually, I was. I'm like, okay, so if I'm going to bet, I'm going to bet where I'm going to win big instead of,
That's right.
what's $1,000? If I'm going to throw $2 at something that's got long shot odds, well, I'm going to go for the big shot.
You're the guy who bets every horse, aren't you?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. All right. You mentioned leagues. We're talking about fantasy leagues. Let's talk about a league that
Been a while.
it hasn't had a whole lot happen because they're all waiting on John Tavares. The NHL, Tavares signed with the Maple Leafs. The Erik Karlsson trade didn't happen out of Ottawa. But we are starting to have some things happen. The Sabres made a trade with Carolina, bringing Skinner. And there are some restricted free agents out there that are unsigned. And I'll stick with that team here in our home market as an example. Buffalo Sabres. Of course, we're going to do this and probably sign Sam Reinhart. But here's a second overall pick a few years ago. He was a restricted free agent. They retain his rights. And a player of comparable numbers has a contract with the Detroit Red Wings. That's Dylan Larkin. And you look at numbers, like Reinhart's numbers are right there, production numbers. Dylan Larkin's got a $6 million a year contract.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, well, there's the comparable. If I'm Reinhart's agent, hey, my guy's going to give him 8 years, $6 million per season. Done. And I hate that contract for Sam Reinhart. I don't hate Sam Reinhart as a player, but under that contract, because I'd take Dylan Larkin every day of the week over Sam Reinhart. Sorry, Sam. You're a good kid, good player, but I think Larkin's a much better player.
Two things for you. Number one, let me piggyback off that, because you're right. Generally, in all the other sports, right, especially football, when you talk about like a tiers of players and free agents and all that, one guy signs, everything else sort of falls in place right after that, right? Somebody's got to set the market, then you go from there, and it's quick, bang, bang, bang. Hockey's never been like that ever, from what I can think of. You need those guys to go out and reach and get big contracts. But whether you're talking unrestricted or restricted, it just seems like every scenario is overanalyzed to death. And look, we're like, 6 weeks out? Not even a month out of training camp here, and arguably one of the Sabres' best players. And look, there's 16 other restricted free agents, many of them notable, who are in the same situation. So many of these teams are dealing with this across the league right now. And it sort of baffles me. But what baffles me even more, and I think this is where I want to take this, is the lack of use of restricted free agency, right? And what I mean by that is
nobody uses it.
Nobody makes an offer. We've got legitimate players, especially this year. You had William Nylander still not signed, Dylan Larkin, Sam Reinhart. I'm missing a few, but
the offer sheet you're talking about.
I'm talking about an offer sheet. The real use of restricted free agency.
Right.
Yes, it's a placeholder for the current team to kind of get a deal done, which is always what happens. But man, the days of offer sheets are gone in the NHL. Is this just a buddy system with owners now?
Yeah.
Or what?
Well, so let me tell you from my experience working for a team with the offer sheet, there was two notable ones that I recall.
Yeah.
Peter Forsberg was one when Nashville offer sheeted him, and he got the big deal with Philly. Then, oddly enough, they ended up trading him to Nashville years later. All right, but it got Forsberg a huge deal. I want to say it was with Philly. Maybe it was Cal. But anyways, Forsberg got an offer sheet. And Thomas Vanek was the other one.
Of course.
Of the Edmonton Oilers. And many fans have pointed out, wow, in the aftermath, they should have let him go, and they got 4 first-round picks. Because the price is heavy.
It is.
So heavy when you sign a player for certain money. And it's always funny. People think, wow, that team just threw an offer sheet in there. It's a negotiated contract. Yeah. The player's agent negotiates a deal. It's not as if you can just submit an offer sheet. It is a negotiated contract by a team, and the other team that retains its right has to match. There has been teams get pissed when their players get offer sheeted,
right?
Because
Dustin Penner was the only
Penner
other
was
notable one. I just looked it up for you.
He was the only one that was not matched, I believe.
I think
correct?
You're right. Yes,
to Edmonton.
Yes, to Edmonton.
Right. So, and the Kings. I want to say it was the Kings.
It was Anaheim
and the Ducks. The Ducks got the picks.
Right.
All right. Let me chime in here because,
but it's too hefty of a price to pay, giving up
always
3 or 4.
Always.
But the percentage hit on NHL draft picks is so low, which
it's terrible.
Which is why it doesn't make any sense.
It's terrible.
But it is. But let me tell you why it's a heavy price to pay. Because first-round picks are major currencies when come trade deadline to go and get a player to help you win the Stanley Cup. Like you think, Dustin Penner, did he really work out? Good player.
First, second, and third-round picks were given up in that deal.
Yeah, but they may have. I think they made a trade. They may have matched it, then traded him because of that. But whatever. The price it depends on the salary level too on what's given up. But the price is so hefty, it's kind of like screwing your neighbor, right? Because there's kind of like this unwritten code, like, hey, you don't offer sheet our guys, right? We won't offer sheet your guy, like, it's such an
All
unpopular
of this
move when it's
sounds
done.
very Canadian. That's what this does. All of this sounds.
Who do you think runs the league? Come on. It's a good old boys network.
Listen to me. William Nylander is 22 years old. And if he cost me 3 first-round picks and an $8 million per year contract, and I'm X team, let's take the Sabres, right? Who have cap to work with. Let's take the Sabres. If they decide to let Sam Reinhart walk because they're going to drop an offer sheet on William Nylander, who is proven. Is that arguable? He's proven. He's a player.
He's proven.
He's a player. And he's 22, which is basically like getting a first-round pick, right? That's basically like getting a first-round pick.
That was the bell to say that's a great call.
Thank you.
It is a great
Thank
call.
you. We have sound effects now. I just don't get it. The business hat on me, the American
Say
business
why
hat
not
me.
do it?
So is it just that the general manager that does it doesn't want to walk in that room with the other GMs
Too
at their
bad.
annual meeting?
Too
and
bad.
I mean, Kevin,
Well,
this is your wheelhouse. You
I
can
think it's
explain
twofold.
this.
I think it's twofold. I think it's like a gentleman's agreement. Like it's dirty play.
Well, then that's
if you will.
collusion in some degree,
Sure,
isn't it?
sure. I think the second thing is what do first round picks represent? What do they represent?
The future, youth,
Hope.
There you go. You know what else they represent?
You know what I hope? I hope a team like the Sabres can get William Nylander, who scores 45 goals.
Hold
And
on
I don't
a
care
second.
what it costs me.
They also represent for GM job security.
That's right.
Because you
You're
know
right.
what? Hey, listen, I got a couple picks next year. I need those to help build, to give me that 5 years of job security. That's what they represent.
How come the
I get
NHLPA hasn't made
get
a
it.
more issue of this? Because it's in the
I agree.
CBA as a weapon and
Correct.
a tool for players to move, yet nobody does it because there's an unwritten rule against it unless the NHLPA is in the same bed with the GMs
Because they
on
don't.
this.
Well, because they don't want to give up first round picks that they can use to keep job security, build their team with either via trade or actually drafting players. That's why.
I'm with
it's
Mike.
hard to
It
get
makes
those
no
picks.
sense whatsoever.
I think it needs to make a comeback.
And somewhere along the line, some GM is going to go. Some young GM who is not part of the old boys network is going to say, you know what, this makes too much sense. I'm doing it.
Okay. Let me give you an example of a player that many thought should have been offer sheeted. Matter of fact, when I was doing a hockey show every day, I thought, hey, offer sheet Ryan O'Reilly.
Yeah.
And he didn't get offer sheeted. And imagine if the Sabres gave an offer sheet and got him for the same money. You know which picks they would have given up?
Same ones they traded for, right?
No, Sam Reinhart and Jack Eichel.
That's right.
So that's why. That's why teams don't do it. Why you don't give them up.
I truly feel like it's just one move away. If one team's going to do it eventually, and then everybody's going to start to do it again.
But if you're one move away, fitting that money into your salary cap will be challenging.
It will
The amount
be.
of money you have to pay for a team not to match.
And that's
that's
another part of this discussion is that the cap just doesn't raise enough every year to allow you to make these kind of slam dunk moves. But this vice is here, and nobody's using it, and that
It needs
really
to come out of the
bothers me.
CBA. Then why is it even in there?
And
anymore?
let me tell you even more so. The NBA offers no compensation to make an offer sheet. There's no compensation if somebody signs an offer sheet with you and you get that player. None. They should be flying off the table every year. You should be seeing a dozen of these a year.
If I hold a player's rights,
That's right.
and you're the Milwaukee Bucks, and you offer sheet my player, and he goes, I don't match it, he's gone.
Gone. He's just
No, there should be a draft
gone.
pick coming back the other way.
It's the cleanest CBA ever, and we see it 3-4 times a year at most. There should be a dozen a year. I mean, it's
and
like,
how many happen in the NBA?
it's basically unrestricted free agency. Like I said, there's about 3-4 a year is all it is. But there's tons of restricted free agents.
That's shocking.
And there's
to me
tons of money.
That's shocking me. There's not more
Nothing.
in the NBA.
Yeah, I think it goes back to your point, Kevin, that it's this unwritten rule that it's kind of dirty play. It's dirty.
Yes.
It's cheap, right? It's cheap to go and steal a guy who's technically under contract, under rights with another team.
GMs, there's like cliques in the NHL
I
amongst
get it.
GMs,
You
right?
want to be able to trade with people. I get
Yes,
it. I get it.
And you talk about you want to win a cup, most teams have to make moves at the deadline. And if some guys, so Mike, I want to trade with you, but I offer stole a player from Paul, or I offer sheeted Paul's player and made him overpay a guy early and kind of stuck it to him because I knew he couldn't do it on the cap. And I want to say they did this with Seth Jones, by the way. I want to say this happened with Seth Jones. So kind of stuck it to him, forced him to pay early. Well, you two are great buddies. You and I are not, Mike. I call you and be like, I'm not going to trade this with you. You screwed my buddy Paul. Like, that's not how we
but
do
there's
it.
27 other teams.
Doesn't matter, Paul. It does not matter. I'm just telling you.
All right. It doesn't make any sense to me at all.
I'm just a lot more diabolical, I think.
I just surprised that it's there as a tool, and the NHLPA never makes an issue out of it. Well, then get it out or come up with another solution to it.
Well, no, I think you need to have it in there because it's one of the only ways.
Nobody uses it. Why would
it's one of the only ways you're restricted free. Well, listen, the player's got to be attractive enough where a deal's got to be made, but the money's got to be so ridiculous for the player to move, right? I'm just telling you, they're tough to negotiate. And they're tough to execute, and they're usually always matched, and then there's just bad blood because that's why teams don't do it.
One more thing, though. You mentioned how one of the reasons this doesn't get done is because GMs want job security, and this is generally a bad way to do that because you're making a slam dunk move, you're taking on a lot of cap.
Well, and then you're making things difficult for yourself to deal with other GMs.
But to me, you're overvaluing your draft picks. If you're doing
they all overvalue the draft picks.
But
come on.
Because, let's say it does cost 3 firsts for a Nylander, right?
Yeah, so what?
And if the GM shouldn't be worried about his job in 6 years.
Well, my whole point.
Right? Who cares about 6 years when those draft picks actually mean something?
When Vanek went, if the Buffalo Sabres didn't match Thomas Vanek, and they had to because they just lost.
Would have been it was a PR issue,
right? They just lost Drury and Briere.
Was it 4 firsts?
It would have been 4 first-rounders because of the money, $7 million because of the contract level, and many fans. We should have let him go.
Yeah.
I said, well, you know what? They would not have been over. They would have been a better team with Vanek.
Yes.
Right? They wouldn't have been as crappy. And so, you got to think that way. Like, okay, they're bringing this player in. This guy's goal scorer, scores 30 goals a year. They would not have been as terrible, theoretically, so they wouldn't have been first overall picks. And unless you get 1, 2, or 3, it is a roll of the dice in the first round of the National Hockey
League. And I understand, right? Somebody goes out and puts a sheet in, and they're essentially valuing your player for you, right? They're setting a market value for your player, and that could I could see that hurting your feelings, right?
How is it any different than arbitration, though?
Oh, you know how arbitration works?
I'll even go meaner than that. Too bad. Then you should have signed him a month ago, right?
True.
If you've got a market value that you want to get done, get it done. Don't even let another team come in swinging. We're at August 21st here, and there's 15, 16 restricted free agents. A lot of them who are major players who need a contract. I don't understand this.
That summer of 2007.
Yeah.
Inadvertently, the Buffalo Sabres let the market be set without their players, with their players, but by not doing it themselves.
That's right.
Because Drury and Briere left, right? And massive contracts, that set the market. Then Vanek gets the offer sheet, boom, set the market again.
That's right.
And Buffalo never made,
And if they'd have been proactive a year earlier and gotten those guys signed, none of that would have happened. And I know there's a lot of stories
There's a lot of stories
There's a lot of
it,
stories, but ultimately, bottom line, they did not get deals done when they had the opportunity to do it.
Let me tell you how NHL arbitration works, by the way.
All right, real quick.
Because the year prior, Danny Briere was the first player going to arbitration. And it was the first arbitration case under new collective bargaining agreement. And Danny Briere was chosen by the NHLPA. They got to choose. I think they alternate years what they choose first. So Briere, the NHLPA got to pick the first player going to arbitration. Obviously, you want to pick someone who's going to get a high reward. It's going to drive the other contracts up. So the NHLPA picks Briere. Now, if Briere was offered a contract prior to the hearing, do you think he's going to take it?
No.
He can't, right? He's got the entire union behind him.
The union won't let him, right.
The pressure from the union and his fellow players to not take a deal and go get a massive... So he was making 1 point something before. He goes in, let's say he was offered $4 million, theoretically, a year. It's a hell of a raise. Don't take it because we're going to get you more.
You're going to get you 5.
And they got 5 in the arbitration award, right? So the pressure's... So NHLPA picks a player. Then the owners, NHL picks a player. So they pick a plumber, right? I love plumbers, by the way. I'm just saying, but they pick a grinder, right? Fourth line guy to go in there because it's going to be low.
Sure.
And then it alternates, arbitration
Interesting.
hearings. So they can manipulate the average salary, right? Everything's a game.
So speaking of the CBA, well, let's end on this because obviously there's been plenty of talk about this pending lockout and the CBA is about to expire.
It expires in 2022. We got plenty of time.
There's an opt-out after 2019.
No.
So let me ask you, is that the holdup with these restricted free agents?
I can't imagine.
Are these guys being offered 2-year deals and they want 4?
I see what you're saying.
Right?
Yes.
Probably.
Well, if I'm a team,
they want to be compensated during that lockout year, right?
That's correct. If I'm a team, I'm doing a bridge deal, a 2-year deal.
Yeah, most of these guys most teams would want that on a restricted free agent.
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Particularly with a potential lockout coming, that's even magnifies it.
And really, and one of the things you can view on SpotTrack is the breakdown of these recent deals. There's been about a dozen extensions, sizable 8-year extensions, which that's a whole nother topic here, but the structure of them are very signing bonus heavy, and that's because if and when the league does lock out in 2020, these guys will get their money from the bonus.
If and when. It's going to happen.
I think there's going to be a few leagues locking out here soon.
Just because history, let that be your compass.
I think sports as we know it is over.
Really?
No, that's
okay.
That's no way to end this.
Yeah, all right.
Well, okay, then this might be the last edition of the SpotTrack.com podcast.
Wow, Mike, thanks for the optimism. We're going into the start of the NFL season. Training camps are opening up for the NHL. Baseball's heading towards the playoffs, and the NBA is going to start with LeBron in a new spot here, but sports are over. Okay.
What do you think about that, Susanna?
Back to you, Bob. All right. Thanks again to Mike Tagliere from FantasyPros.com. Make sure you check them out. And also make sure you check out the premium subscription service here. Become a premium member of SpotTrack.com. Lots of great tools, contract breakdowns, some exclusive stuff to premium members of SpotTrack.com. Get the app. Make sure you rate us on iTunes. And check out BuffaloSportsPage.com if you're so inclined to do so. For Mike Giannetti, the founder of SpotTrack.com, and Paul Peck, I'm Kevin Sylvester. Thanks for listening to the SpotTrack.com podcast.